Each person plots their own route through life. I mean, I happen to join a profession where pretty much everybody retired at 55. Now, there are a few professions that do this, and I mean, emergency services being one of them. And I've never worked in emergency services, but I do imagine that the service prefer to have people in frontline services that are peak fitness. Pretty much for the same reason you may not choose a 55-year-old to captain your football team. A team of firefighters may prefer to be supported in dangerous situations by other officers that are at their fittest. But the profession that I spent most of my career in was consulting with the Big Four, specifically PwC and Deloitte. Now, these companies also structure things making it optimal for you to leave at about the age of 55. And if you wander around any of these offices, you won't really see anybody above the age of 45, never mind 55. I mean, nobody in these offices are likely to be chasing a burglar, scaling a burning stairway to rescue people, but they will be working in teams, much like in a football team, where your team is only as strong as your weakest player. So, am I suggesting that 55-year-olds are worse performers in consulting than 35-year-olds? Well, maybe actually, yeah. But where age really becomes a disadvantage is when winning contracts for the company. So let's take an imaginary situation. So we've got a PwC team pitching for a multi-million-pound contract for management consulting to a big multinational company. And whilst they wait to do their pitch, they see a team from Deloitte come out of the boardroom they've just pitched before them. And the average age of that team look around 30 to 35. Then you look around your team, and your team has an average age of about 45, and at least one member's approaching 60. Now, if you go into that pitch and you deliver exactly the same quality of pitch at the same price, you may find that you lose out just because of the unconscious bias of the customer. The Deloitte team probably just seem to have a bit more energy. So just like in the fire service, the culture and expectation throughout your working life is that you're going to retire at 55 or before. All people older than you in the same company seem to disappear before the 55, and you don't really meet anyone in your organisation above that age. This makes you think a bit differently. State pension's not something that you can rely on. You'll have at least 12 years of not working before that even comes into play. You start to become aware that you kind of must plan to have any chance of a successful retirement. And your employer is also planning with you, so they don't want you kicking around after 55. So they structure the way they pay you and the way they pay your pensions so that you're unlikely to be in a position where you're clinging on to stay in that job after you've reached 55, because they'd really prefer you to leave. Now, the amounts they recommend you contribute to your pension and the amounts that they contribute for you are designed to make sure that you're comfortable going at 55. So in some ways, I had a bit of an advantage that my employer was setting things up to make a retirement at 55 for me not only possible, but quite likely, really. But then I decided to leave the Big Four when I was 45, and I moved to some jobs where people didn't really retire until they were in their late 60s, and pension contributions were set at the minimum. I mean, at this point, I knew that I had to take more control of my own financial future, so I had to make a plan. I identified that the 40% tax bracket was a big threat for me financially, and I needed to make sure that my salary didn't all just disappear in tax. So I reviewed my finances to make sure that the amount I took as salary always kept me below the limit, which I'd paid 40% tax at. This meant I had to speak to my employer and increase my pension contributions. And this gave me a couple of added benefits, really. One, that I was paying less NI every month, and also my employer then contributed more of their money to my pension as well. So I'd class that as a win-win-win. So it's It also meant that every time my salary increased, that I would speak to an employer and ask them to put that increase into my pension contributions again. Now, the tax savings I worked out were absolutely amazing on doing this. 40% is a lot of tax. But then I moved again to an employer that didn't actually permit me to change my pension contributions. They only allowed the basic 3% from them, 5% from me. I had no choice at this point other than to open a SIPP, which is a self-invested personal pension. So now what was happening is my taxable pay was way above the limit for paying 40%. So I was losing a fair chunk of my salary to tax every month. Now, when that money landed in my bank every month, I'd take the amount that I'd paid 40% on and I would pay this into my SIPP. Now, a few weeks later, HMRC would then top up my SIPP with an extra 25% of this. And then in January, I'd fill my tax return out and they would work out that I'd paid some tax of 40% and then they'd pay an extra 25% of it directly into my bank account. So for that money that I paid 40% tax onto HMRC, they've now given me all that tax back, which is fantastic. And for anyone who pays a higher rate of tax, it really is worth having to think about this. What I actually did was to trade some of the income out my wages for a much higher amount that I could access from 55 onwards. And because I've been conditioned that 55 was the normal or sensible time to retire, this made perfect sense to me. I had a choice: a slightly bigger car at the age of 45 and retiring at 60, or a smaller car at 45 and retiring at 55. And I took the extra 5 years of retirement. You know, the family I'm from has a history of dementia, and also I've got a hereditary eye condition, and it could see me blind by the time I reach state retirement age. Now, we all have freedom to make our own choices between jam today and jam tomorrow, and making either of these choices is not a crime, but not knowing the options exist, now that is a crime to me. So make sure you do keep yourself informed on what your options are, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for listening, guys.